Well, hey everyone, I am your host, Gentry, and welcome to the Vibrant Life Show. This show is all about exploring the purposes God has placed in our lives and the passions He's placed in our hearts to reach the community He's placed us in for such a time as this. So whether we're hearing stories of those living out their passions, helping you discover your purpose, asking hard questions, or leaning into cultural moments, the hope of this show is to remind us that the life that God has created us to live is an adventurous one, a meaningful one, a purposeful one. He has invited us to live the vibrant life. And there are so many things that can really get in the way of us living into this vibrancy that we've been talking about for almost a year now. And there are so many things and really practical things in our lives that hinder us, that really fill our schedules, that keep us from that place of intimacy with God and really knowing who He is and what He has in store for us. The hope of this show, like I've said in the intro, is that we really remember that we are created on purpose, for such a time as this. And every little thing in our lives is not by accident. God is in control. He is sovereign and He is good. But there are things that get in the way. And I just want to talk about today the little things that when we let go unchecked in our lives can really hinder us from truly experiencing the love that we are called to have for God and for others. So today we're talking about those little things that all of a sudden, have you ever been in a situation where it just exploded and you're like, where in the world did that come from? I mean, it could have been a relationship. It could have been you on a bad day. I mean, I remember one time, honestly, I wish I could say it was a long time ago. It was like 2 months ago. And it was just such a week where multiple things were happening. Things built up. I was so frustrated. I was not getting sleep and little things started to go wrong. And I remember opening my car door to head to my niece's birthday party. And I opened my car door and my nail, I get my nails done and it flipped off and my nail just flew off in my garage. And I literally had a full-on meltdown because my nail came off and I just could not get it together. I mean, I got in the car, then I was 15 minutes late and I was like, I'm always the last one that shows up at, family events. I'm so sorry, but it's just true. And I just could not get it together. And I was in the car and crying out to God. I'm like, what is going on? Why is my life so frustrating? And it's like, okay, Allie, the nail just sent you over the edge. But that's the thing in so many of our lives, it wasn't the nail that actually did it, right? I mean, it was multiple things: not getting sleep, not investing in relationships, not really spending enough time with God in prayer or in the scriptures or in worship. And I was just doing. And I just didn't have the capacity or the space to deal with things along the way or take time with God to be still and know that He's still in control, even when things in my schedule was out of control, that He's in control. That it led to this big blow up moment. But the fact is that it wasn't the nail. It was multiple little things along the way that led to this huge explosion of a moment. But it wasn't that it just all of a sudden ended up there. Can anyone think of a time when that's happened to you? Or maybe it's a relationship. So maybe there's a relationship that all of a sudden it just blew up or it ended out of quote unquote nowhere. But the reality is, if you look back at multiple things along the way, there were conversations that maybe should have been had. There was healing that maybe should have been done. Or maybe there's trips that should have been taken. You can kind of break it down. Shoulda, coulda. The fact is we can't go back to that. But what we can do today is to look into certain things where we can catch what we call, and we'll dive into, the little foxes in our lives, that if we can do it along the way, and in our going, and have space enough to create that time with God to really know Him and His heart for us, then we can avoid these huge, massive moments to the extent that we have control of them, instead of letting it get to that spot. And Song of Songs, which I find is, it's actually the least preached on book of the Bible, Song of Songs. And I actually love this passage of scripture, specifically from the Passion Translation. But this Song of Songs 2, 10 through 16, and we've been actually going through this for our Arise season, this event that I get to do here in Arizona. And it's this beautiful picture of a bridegroom and his bride to be. And they're having this conversation. And it's supposed to be this picture of God and his people. But then when Jesus came, it's this picture of Jesus and the church, the bridegroom and his bride to be. Because we're still waiting for him to come back, right? We're still waiting for him. So we're in this engagement phase, this bride to be as his church. And he's speaking to her and he's saying, darling, arise and come away with me, my beautiful companion, my beautiful one. And he's speaking, and it says even in the NIV, arise, my darling, come away, my beautiful one, for now the winter is past and the rain has ended and gone away. And he's talking about this season of springtime. And COVID, I think we've all been through, and it's still happening now, a season of confusion, a wilderness season of not really sure what's going on. And it feels like it's been kind of that winter feel where is life? Where is new life? Because we all got thrown off of our axis so hardcore during COVID. And I know I've talked about it before on one of the messages on Sabbath, but we were on this hamster wheel going in the Western church and in the Western culture. And we didn't know, I think we didn't even know we were doing it. Like we were in just this like kind of zoned out type of phase. Like, have you ever driven home and been like, how did I get here? You're so in the motion, but you still got home okay. But you didn't really remember the process of getting home because you're just going through the motions. And I think there should definitely be something on our cars that's like a warning whenever someone's in that phase. But I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Like you get home and you're like, how in the world did I get up? How did I get here? Because I don't truly remember every turn I took or all of the things that were happening. And I think that's what was happening before COVID. We were just going through the motions and we were going so quickly. Our schedules were full and we didn't even almost know that we were just going through the motions and in a sense numbing out and almost having no ability to really hear what God is wanting to say to us along the way because we didn't have the margin or the space and the time away with him to hear it. But what happened is that COVID came and like knocked us all of our axis and like off the hamster wheel. And we were like, oh, wow, like life doesn't actually have to be this insane. Like actually I can get off of this hamster wheel and I can go at the pace that I need to because so many things got shut down. Events didn't happen. We were watching church from home. Maybe you're working from home. Some of you are still working from home. And there's so many things that changed during that time. And so we started to realize we actually don't have to be in this hurry at all times. And I think that God, I know that God, he promises in Romans 8:28, he can use any situation for good. Like he promises that he can use that for his purposes. And so I believe like even during this season, he's been using all of the craziness that's been going on to say, hey, like let's step away, be still and know that I am God. And let's rework our relationship so that we can get back to the core of why we were created. And when I think about the vibrant life, this feeling of this full life of brightness and of really growth, continual growth and energy and wholeness is what vibrancy means. We can't have that we can't have it in truth of what God has promised us without spending time with him. And I think a lot of us think, okay, well, a quick moment here and then we can just go and run and do all of the things. And what I've realized is so many, personally, I'm going to make this personal. Personally, I have been doing a lot of things for God and not always doing it with God. And what happens when we do things continually for him, and a lot of these things are wonderful things, the things that you're working on, the people you're serving, the church you're going to, or the work, the job you have, those are good things. Like we're all called to work. I mean, I always tell people like the thing is that work was in the garden before the fall. So it's not like we don't like, that's the nature of the fall. Like we actually are beings who are created to work and to do and to go. But when we make that everything and we're like, okay, even these good things we're just doing for God and not with him, we lose the whole purpose because God has created us for relationship. And out of that relationship, we will go and do. Out of the relationship, there will be good works and there will be faith without works is dead. And that's what James tells us. So it's not like it gets us out of the works, But I'm wondering how many of us feel like we're just spinning plates. And it feels like things are just crashing down around us. And all of a sudden it's these big moments. And God's like, actually, if you could just catch these foxes along the way, then we can totally tend to this garden, this picture that's set up in Song of Songs. And in verse, let's go 15 in Song of Songs 2, it says, catch the foxes for us. And this is right after he's talking about the blossoming vines and the fragrance and come away with me, my darling. And again, this is Jesus to the church, like, come away with me, my beautiful one. And I just want to tell someone, like, you are beautifully and wonderfully made, as it says in Psalm 139. God has created you and he has chosen you and he has more for you. And Ephesians 1 has so many identity pieces. And as the church, we need to hold on to the fact that God is saying, actually, I made you and it is very good. Like, I love you and I want to restore it back to what my purpose was for you in the first place. And that is relationship with him and relationship with others. So there's this beautiful picture in the Song of Psalm 2, Solomon, and it says in verse 15, though, right after this whole beautiful thing of let me hear your voice and let me hear your sweet, let me see your face, which is lovely. In verse 15, it says, catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, for our vineyards are in bloom. And that's what I want to focus on right now, is because when you read chapter 50 or verse 15, catch the foxes. And so he's like, well, this is so beautiful. And then he just turns, he's like, now go catch the foxes. Like I was in this place of like, oh, I'm so lovely. And oh, my darling. And like that intimacy with God. And then all of a sudden the reality that so many little foxes are going to try and steal the intimacy with him along the way. So he goes, okay, let's establish the intimacy between us and the relationship we have. And it, like in Matthew 22, it says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And this is Jesus saying, now this is the greatest commandment. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And so if we really are people and even I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians 13, when we could have all of these things going on and we can speak in tongues and we could go serve a ton of people. But if we don't have love, it is just a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. And so we have to get back to love. We have to get back to intimacy with God that leads us to vibrancy. Because it reminds us of our identity. So that identity leads to vibrancy, identity, and knowing that time of who he says that we are. And so catching those little foxes along the way. And if you're just joining us on the Vibrant Life Show, my hope today is that we can remember that it is the little things that matter. Seth Godin, my dad's a lead pastor here at the church that I go to, Renovation Church in Phoenix. And he mentioned this quote on this last Sunday. And at the end of it, it says, a small thing done habitually is no small thing. A small thing done habitually is no small thing. And even Charles Spurgeon, like he wrote, and I love this, but he talks about how like the whole beach is made up of little grains of sand, or the whole ocean is made up of little droplets of water. So all of these, like there's no small thing and no unimportant thing, especially as believers. So we've got to be on guard for these foxes that come into our life and try to steal from the vineyard, try to take away the fruit and try to destroy what God is trying to establish. And these foxes, like in this scripture, like, honestly, foxes are so cute. Like they're like the cutest little creatures. And you think, oh, I want to take one home. But the reality is you don't want to take one home. They're going to destroy it. And I think it very interesting that it's not like, oh, beware of the bears or beware of the lions or the tigers or, oh my type of situation that could happen in the vineyards and come and destroy everything. He's saying the little foxes that come in. And usually foxes come in at night. They are conniving. They can be deceptive. They can be so sly, but they're also so cute. And I feel like that's sometimes the hard part when we look at our lives, like the little things that come in. It's not that they're like so super cute things, but it's just sometimes it feels enticing, or sometimes those little things don't feel like they're going to really destroy something along the way. But the enemy in 1 Peter 5:8, it says that he prowls around like a roaring, like a lion ready to devour. And so we have to be on guard at all times, that we remember who we are in Christ, who Jesus has spoken over us to be, and God has created us to be. And then when we move out from that place of intimacy, and hopefully every day and continuously, into reality, these little foxes that try to steal it from us, we remember our identity. And in that, it actually will lead us to, honestly, to the beautiful part about Song of Songs is that you don't do it alone. There's so much community around it if you go and read it. And so I just pray that we can get back to that place of intimacy, because over time leads to trust leads to vulnerability, and vulnerability leads to intimacy. And I always say intimacy will lead to vibrancy. And so that is what we need to be on guard for, because these little sins in our lives, like if I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and if I'm trying to take a plane to New York City, right? And the trajectory is off to the south by 1, maybe 2 degrees. By the time we fly 5 hours across the United States, we'll actually end up in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but it's not huge to where it's noticeable in the air. But then when you try to get to the point of landing, it's like, oh my gosh, we're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Like, we can't do this. We've got to reroute. And I think that's what sometimes when we leave things unchecked in our lives, we leave things unchecked in our hearts, our minds, and the way that we're doing things, it will lead us to a place that we never intended to be in the first place, to be on guard for the little things. And as I mentioned before, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, like we need to be on guard with the things in our hearts. What pain are we dealing with? What relationships are we going through that have caused us even rejection? Because a lot of times we might project that onto God. And as I say, like, it is hard to hear the Spirit when your heart is hard. It's hard to hear the Spirit when your heart's hard, because maybe you've been hurt. Maybe you have felt like maybe even God didn't protect you along the way. And it makes it very difficult to hear what he's trying to say and show us the way to go, and to feel like we can actually have intimacy with him, because we're not only, I know in Proverbs 4:23, it says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. But we're not to guard that from the one who created our hearts. He's the one who can heal us. And personally, I've realized in this last season that in the pain of friendship loss, the pain of relationship loss, I've actually projected that onto God and been like, you know what, God, I don't trust that you're good. I don't trust that if I take this step forward, that you're going to protect my heart, that you are going to be good, and that I can like really lean into you. And as I spoke to him about it, as in my going, he started to show these deep insecurities that I was facing, and he was able to heal them. And that goes back to intimacy. If we get away with him and he wants to hear our voice of prayer, even if it's honest and it's stuff that we feel like we can't say to him, like he actually wants to hear those things so he can heal it. And to catch the foxes in our mind, you know that phrase, the train of thought? I think it's like, I love that phrase, because that's really what happens. Like, we get on this train and we just like go, and it's going to take you to your destination. Or there's sometimes where you're like, you didn't pay attention. I don't know if you've ever traveled other places or maybe gotten on the wrong bus in your own city. But if you do not pay attention to the little details of even which way you are headed, you are going to end up in the complete opposite direction, because you're not paying attention to the little signs along the way. And my friend, when I lived in London, my friend, he fell asleep on one of the on the tube, which is like the subway in London. And he fell asleep. And so when he can't pay attention and realize that he's going the wrong way, he ended up an hour and a half outside of the city, woke up on a train in the middle of a train yard with the sun rising, because he passed out on a train somewhere and he just fell asleep, and he wasn't awake. He wasn't alert to what was happening. And when that happens, you can't get off on a stop and redirect yourself. And I think some of us right now, we've numbed out. We're using other things in our lives, whether it be TV, food, people, alcohol, social media. I mean, I had to fast TikTok during Lent because I was like, it was a form of numbing out on things. And if we're not aware of what's going on in our mind and keeping track of where our thoughts are headed, because one thought of anger gone unchecked can lead to bitterness, which leads to resentment. and then it's a huge blow up like we were talking about earlier. Or this little moment of jealousy leads to the fact that all of a sudden, like, we're so envious that we do all these other things just to try and make us feel like we're worthy of something, or we lose friendships over it. Or a quick moment of lust could lead us to this moment of really destroying relationships. So we've got to keep that in check. And the last thing is that we have got to catch the foxes of how we live our lives. And from the mindset, because I really believe it starts in the heart and then it goes into our heart is where we believe what we believe about our identity. And in our mind, it's like what we think about our identity. So we have to go back to intimacy to remind us of our identity. And in our minds, we've got to keep this thought of, I even think of Isaiah 43:18-19, and it says, forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. And that's actually what God promises in Song of Songs. Like, he's saying there's a new day of destiny bursting forth around you. And I feel that with the church right now. I feel like this spring season, which represents revival, is like starting to break out within us because we're getting back to the reality of the intimacy that we need with our Creator, that we don't have to just be doing stuff all of the time, which leads to the last point, to love the Lord your God with all your strength. And I always see this as like your finances or your family, the way that you use your house, the way that you use your gifts, your graces, your personality, or whatever he might have given you, your job. These are the things that we do. We can love with our strength. We love with the physical. But what happens is that a lot of times we start to, I don't know, I mean, I'm speaking for myself. What has happened in this last season for me is that I have gotten that confused, like activity confused with intimacy. And in that, I have lost the joy along the way of the doing for God and the doing with God, because we become exhausted by all of this activity. And God's like, I just actually want you to just stop, time out for a second. We talked last week with Libby Freeze about the spiritual disciplines. And even one that her and I talked about afterwards is the Sabbath and rest. Like, that's a discipline. And in that, we can actually remember and gain our strength and remember who we are, so that, again, we are not human doings. We are human beings. We remember who we are, and then out of the overflow, we go and do. And when we're zapped with our strength, like, the joy of the Lord is our strength. And getting back to the get to, like, I get to do these things. I really believe God actually wants us to enjoy our lives, people. Like, I actually am relearning that, like, God wants us to find joy in the day to day. And he wants us to find joy in our relationship with him and joy in our relationship with others. And our activity does not equal our identity. And I am working through that in this season, and sometimes it's going to be a season of saying, no, I cannot, so I can remember who I am, because God loves me first. He wants me to come away with him and remember that he calls his bride beautiful and darling and my companion. And so my hope and my heart is that when we are not only in our relationship with God and our way of doing this, living our lives out every day, but if we're on guard of our heart and our mind and the way that we're living this out, and we're like, you know what, we're going to catch the little foxes, because it doesn't say the big foxes. Like, we've seen so many leaders fall lately, and it's like, that didn't just happen overnight. The emergency didn't happen overnight. They did not keep things in check along the way, the little foxes. And I really believe the world puts a different standard on believers because I think they hope that we take care of the little foxes. And let's be that church, the vibrant church, but it starts with the individual. It starts with you. It starts with me, catching one little fox at a time. And I just pray that maybe at the end of this, you can really see, and I'm just praying that God reveals to you one little thing. A Ugandan pastor did a preach on a Song of Songs that I listened to, and he said, how do you catch? There's 3 foxes in your garden. How do you catch them? One at a time. Do not be overwhelmed, but just pray that the Lord reveals to you one little thing that you can change today to make a difference, to keep that intimacy, and that your doing is not your identity, but it is who he has made you to be. That's who you are first and foremost, to have relationship with him, relationship with others. And out of that, we get to go and serve and live a wonderful and vibrant life day in, day out. And it is possible to remember that you are loved and you are chosen and that you are worthy because he calls you his. And in verse 16, it says that I am my beloved and he is mine. And that's for all of us. So my hope is that we can remember that as we draw near to God, he draws near to us and he will help us throw off everything that hinders us so that we can run the race marked out for us in such a beautiful, vibrant way that is contagious and really makes other people want to join in. And I just hope that we just remember that every day is an invitation to live the vibrant life. Thank you for joining me on the Vibrant Life Show. I would love to connect with you and get to know you. My favorite place to hang out is over on Instagram at ali.gentry or over on Facebook. You can also go to my website, aligentry.com. That's ALIGENTRY.com. Sign up for my newsletter to stay up to date and get links to the show on all platforms after we air, the show's YouTube channel, and really just all the things. I am so honored to get to hang out with you today. My heart is that you remember that each day is an invitation to live the vibrant life.